Hi everybody, it's Margaret here with Free Tours by Foot, and today I am coming to you from Edinburgh, the birthplace of Harry Potter. And today I'm going to take you on a virtual tour that is all about the world's most famous wizard and the woman who created him. From the first time pen was put to paper to the closing of the last book, we are going to see the role Edinburgh has played in the creation of Harry Potter and the seemingly rags to riches story of the woman who created his world. Unfortunately, today my broom is in the shop, so we're going to have to walk. Now let's go. All right, everybody, we are beginning our tour today just outside Nicholson's Cafe, and they've got a few pieces of art and design to show you. You can see they've got the 9 3/4 sign here. I don't know if I have any Hufflepuffs watching, but your crest is right here. Now, Nicholson's Cafe is a must visit for every Harry Potter fan. Much like the Elephant House, which we'll see later, kind of, the fledgling wizarding world J.K. Rowling created was partially fleshed out right here in this building. And there's evidence of that in this plaque right on the corner. Try to get it so you can see. Perfect. J.K. Rowling wrote some of the early chapters of Harry Potter in the rooms on the first floor of this building. Now what I'm going to do is take us across the street so you can get a full view of the cafe. It's worth mentioning that J.K. Rowling spent time in a lot of cafes in Edinburgh, and you're going to see a lot of different places sort of claiming to be the one where she did a lot of her writing. So I've tried to pick the ones that she's specifically spoken about herself, and Nicholson's is definitely one because she had a family connection. In 1997, the cafe was owned by J.K. Rowling's brother-in-law, Roger Moore. Not that Roger Moore. At the time, she didn't have much money, so she would hide out in cafes, ordering a coffee now and again as she worked on the groundbreaking first book of her Potter series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She spent a lot of time in this cafe in particular because she had the family connection and knew that she could stay as long as she liked. Now, I will say Nicholson's has changed a few times. For a while, it closed and turned into a Chinese restaurant. Then it became known as Spoon, and now it is back to Nicholson's Cafe. So you might see those other names pop up when you're researching your Harry Potter in Edinburgh, but this place here that we're looking at now is Nicholson's Cafe and was also Spoon. And usually, the Elephant Cafe claims to be the birthplace of Harry Potter, but we know that Nicholson's played just as much of an important role in the creation of the legendary series. Speaking to the BBC in 2001, Rowling described Nicholson's as, quote, "the place where I wrote huge parts of the book." It's possible to walk in Rowling's footsteps here, as we know she preferred the window seat, so try to grab it if you can. All right. So I mentioned to you that I am sticking to cafes that J.K. Rowling has mentioned herself. And this is going to be true for the majority of what I show you today, because Edinburgh itself as a city was inspiration for J.K. Rowling, as it has been for many other authors throughout the centuries. And you'll find all sorts of places claiming to have some kind of connection. So what I've tried to do is use J.K. Rowling's own words when I'm choosing the places to share to you. And as much as possible, I'm going to tell you exactly what she said about the different locations I'm showing you. You will notice, of course, that I am from the United States. I do not have a Scottish accent, and I'm not going to try. Nobody wants that. So, okay. Now this next one is just a quick mention, not necessarily a full stop. If you notice here, the road we're on is called Potter Row. So this street bears the name of the world's favorite wizard, and it would make sense to think that perhaps J.K. Rowling, when she was naming her main character, kind of had this in the back of her mind and thought of it, and that's how Harry Potter was named. However, she says no, that's just a coincidence. When giving her first ever interview in America in 1999, J.K. was asked about the name of her hero and how she chose it. Her reply was, quote, "Because Harry is one of my favorite boys' names, but he had several different surnames before I chose Potter. Potter was the name of a brother and sister who I played with when I was very young." I want to show you a school called George Heriot School that's just a little bit further down this road. And it is opposite more of the university buildings that look almost like a medieval palace. And I want to show you these because they do bear a little resemblance to Hogwarts. Now, I have to tell you up front that these buildings are not necessarily listed by J.K. Rowling as inspiration for the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, but they're both unique and beautiful, so I do want to share them with you. So you can see right over here. So the University of Edinburgh owns a number of buildings in the city. This is only one, and it is partially under construction. But you can get a pretty good view there with the clock tower, the pointed tops, the rounded turrets. It's absolutely beautiful. Certainly makes me think of Hogwarts, and it actually is designed partially in line with Holyrood Palace, located not too far from where we're walking right now. Once home to Mary Queen of Scots and Bonnie Prince Charlie, and now our own Queen Elizabeth II, although truth be told, she doesn't spend as much time there as she used to. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you was a school. And this is the entrance to George Heriot's school. Now, it is still an actual school, so I can't get you onto the campus, and we don't want to be invasive with our filming. So I'm just going to show you briefly through the gates this structure. And here we can see it. I'm going to come a little bit further down, see if I can get you guys a better view. The trees make it a little bit hard to see. Oh, here you can get a good idea of one of the turrets there in the middle of your screen. So this is George Heriot's School. It's a 17th century building that's still an operating school, but I used to include it on my Harry Potter tour because it seemed to be a possible inspiration for Hogwarts, but unfortunately that was debunked by the author herself. Originally built in 1628, George Heriot's School was opened as an orphanage and hospital for boys. Today it's a co-ed primary and secondary school. There's 4 grand towers that top the building, which many people said were the inspiration for the towers atop Hogwarts Castle. The school also has 4 houses that students are divided into, and they all do in fact compete for a house cup. The school is easily visible from the locations Rowling used to write in and walk along, so it's easy to see why for so many years Potter buffs believed this building to be the inspiration for her wizarding school. But on the 21st of May 2020, Rowling tweeted, quote, "I sometimes hear Hogwarts was based on one or another of Edinburgh's schools, but that's 100% false too. Hogwarts was created long before I clapped eyes on any of them." It is worth mentioning that in the UK, there are dozens upon dozens of historical schools, all with different designs and house systems. So we'll have to take Rowling's word that this wasn't one that she had in mind when she tells us that the first bricks of Hogwarts were actually laid in a flat in Clapham Junction in London. So this is still the gates to the school on our left. It's got huge grounds. Far nicer than in the school I went to, I can tell you that. So we're going to come around the corner and head down just a regular, typical Edinburgh street. And as we go down, you're going to notice on the ground floor, you've got all the regular, shops and cafes and things like that. But above are these beautiful historic buildings, in some cases 200 or 300 years old. And a lot of them are protected. They're what we call listed buildings, which means they're being preserved for their historical significance. And actually, approximately 75% of historic buildings in Edinburgh are listed buildings, which makes it officially one of the most historic cities in the country. And you're going to see just what I mean when we come around the corner here. So you can see we've got a burrito bar and a pub. I think there's a post office as well. And then the buildings on top. Look how beautiful. All in these different types of stone with the pointed rooftops and big windows. You see there's a local pharmacy and a pastry shop, all crowned by these beautifully detailed buildings. And after all that talk of history, it might surprise you that the next building I'm going to show is actually quite modern. Now there's two parts to this next building, but the part that we're going to look at is relatively recent. You can see right up ahead here, still the matching stonework, so it blends in with the older buildings, but then you've got the modern concrete structure on the top. This is the National Museum of Scotland. And you might be wondering what the National Museum of Scotland has to do with Harry Potter, and that's exactly what I'm going to tell you next. And you're going to have to think back to the first Harry Potter book, and more importantly, and more relevant to this, the first Harry Potter film, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone if you're listening from the United States. When Harry first enters the wizarding world and becomes friends with Ron Weasley, Ron teaches Harry to play wizard's chess. This is just like regular chess, except the pieces are enchanted and can be directed like troops. They literally knock each other down when taking a square. Ron inherited his set from his grandfather, so his pieces trust his direction, whereas Harry and Hermione never seem to do very well. The game of wizard chess plays a crucial role at the end of Harry, Ron, and Hermione's first year at Hogwarts, when the trio have to combine all their skills to get past the traps set for those seeking the Philosopher's Stone. Ron has to direct the trio across a life-size chessboard and even sacrifices himself in the process. And it would seem that when the movie makers were creating the wizard chess pieces, they were thinking of the Lewis chessmen, a group of distinctive 12th century chess pieces that were discovered in a hoard on Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland in 1831. The set is mostly carved out of walrus ivory and is believed to originate from Norway. 11 of the over 90 chess pieces are held at the National Museum of Scotland, and it's these pieces that were used as the basis for the wizarding chess scenes in the Harry Potter films. If you compare the originals in the museum to the ones in the film, the only difference would be the color. Everything else is exactly alike, although I don't think we've seen the ones in the museum ever move on their own. Now we're going to take a quick stop on this road because I want to take you to Elephant House. And chances are, if you're really into Harry Potter, you've heard of this place before. I've mentioned it on our walk already. And that's because Elephant House is one of the most famous cafes that J.K. Rowling wrote in. And they even went as far as to declare themselves the birthplace of Harry Potter, which is quite a claim to make. However, I noticed this morning that the Elephant House is currently boarded up. It looks permanent, but I don't know for sure. And this is an important piece of Harry Potter history, so I'm going to keep an eye on things here as time goes on, and we'll see what transpires. But it's just here on the left, this red building. And again, I'm going to take us a little bit further back so that you can see it properly. So you can see here, this cafe was a destination for thousands of Harry Potter fans every year, as well as fans of people like Ian Rankin and Alexander McCall Smith, who are both well-known patrons. There's a sign right above the door that I'll show you that erroneously claims this is the birthplace of Harry Potter. Rowling herself actually addressed the sign and is quoted as saying, "I'd been writing Potter for several years before I ever set foot in the cafe, so it's not the birthplace, but I did write in there, so we'll let them off," which I think is generous. So although the claim isn't true, J.K. Rowling did spend a lot of time here, particularly whilst writing her second and third Harry Potter books, The Chamber of Secrets and The Prisoner of Azkaban, which apparently... And we're going to pass my favorite statue in Edinburgh, a statue of Greyfriars Bobby, a little terrier whose owner was buried in the churchyard nearby, who it is said then spent 14 years at his dead master's side, living in the graveyard, and eventually buried there himself. There's a statue of him here. Now, if you want to hear more about Greyfriars Bobby, then I've done a highlights of Edinburgh virtual tour for you, so you can hear a little bit more. But we are going to talk about the Kirkyard now, but I'm going to talk specifically about the Harry Potter connection. And you can see here. Now, I want to mention that Greyfriars Kirkyard is open to the public and you can take photographs, but you cannot take video. So what I'm going to do next is share with you some of my personal videos and tell you what the Harry Potter connection is in this churchyard. We are now going to explore the iconic and haunted Greyfriars Kirk, Kirk being a Scottish word for church. The name Greyfriars is in reference to the Franciscan friary which previously stood here, whose friars wore grey habits. The kirkyard was founded in August 1562 as a replacement for the churchyard at St. Giles Cathedral, which had grown too full. Now, on to the Harry Potter connection. As the kirkyard is not far from the cafes J.K. Rowling used to frequent, she would occasionally walk through here for inspiration. Today, Harry Potter fans from around the world come here to see the gravestones, whose engravings inspire the names of so many of the book's characters. Here, you'll find the tombs of Thomas Riddle, and note the spelling, it's a little bit different in the book, R-I-D-D-E-L-L, who of course lent his name to that of the Dark Lord himself. You'll also see the grave of William McGonagall, a poet who shares a surname with the head of Gryffindor House, and a Mrs. Elizabeth Moody, who perhaps gave her name to a certain mad-eyed professor.
According to Rowling, she did not deliberately name Tom Riddle after the gravestone here, but she did admit it may have subconsciously been an inspiration. She also officially confirmed that McGonagall's name did indeed come from the, quote, very bad poet buried here. It's worth mentioning that in a 1999 interview with Barnes & Noble, Rowling was quoted as saying, quote, and so far I have got names from saints, place names, war memorials, gravestones. I just collect them. I'm so interested in names. So it would appear that this kirkyard indeed inspired her. The kirkyard is almost always open to the public, as is the church, from April to October for tourism and year-round for services.
The world that J.K. Rowling describes in her stories is very much old world and mystical, both traits captured along these streets known as the grass market. The grass market was a market going back to at least the 14th century, and the name comes from the grazing pens of the livestock that were originally sold here. In the 1720s, Daniel Defoe described all that could be bought on these cobbled streets, and the list goes on, much like the list of items that can be purchased along Diagon Alley. Lodgings were put here in the 19th century, and many visitors bedded down in one of the cramped rooms located above the shops and pubs along the street, just like Harry did above the leaky cauldron. And a real heartbeat of Edinburgh, Robert Burns himself stayed here in 1791. It's worth mentioning, however, that back then you could see as many as 12 people stuffed into a small double bedroom. One report from 1888 recorded 414 people staying in a total of just 7 lodging houses. But for the purpose of our tour, doesn't this have that Diagon Alley look? Now this part that we're standing on is called West Bow, and this gorgeous curving road looks just like the twisting topsy-turvy thoroughfare in Harry Potter. All the ramshackle colorful buildings that are tucked close together with different shaped windows adorning each one. We can see all the cobblestones as well. Now, Rowling has not stated a connection between these streets and her Wizarding World, but it's perfectly easy to imagine her recalling this area when writing her Diagon Alley scenes, and many of the businesses here really like that correlation between their shops and those in the world of Harry Potter. In fact, it's now gone, but previously there was a mural here on Candlemaker Row that said, no setting could be more perfect for a magical school of witchcraft and wizardry than the majestic Gothic grandeur of this old tune. So it's no surprise that J.K. Rowling selected Scotland as the home of Hogwarts, or that several sites nearby lie Diagon Alley. And a brief shout out, and again, no one's paying me to tell you this, to this shop here called Museum Context, which is absolutely full of all the Harry Potter merchandise you could ever possibly want. You can get your uniforms for Hogwarts inside. You can get yourself a magic wand. There's potions as well, both for children and adults. And you'll notice it's absolutely full from floor to ceiling. So we're going to continue along. And now we're going to head up one of the little alleyways, sometimes called a snicket as well, that sort of almost are all mapped together throughout the city of Edinburgh. Many alleyways and hidden passages and lots of hills and stairs. So I'm about to get my steps in with you all by coming up here. Edinburgh Castle up here to the left, which is where we're headed. There
there, you can see it standing on top of a dormant volcano. But two things to mention, just casual mentions, as we come up. Firstly, there is a restaurant up here on the left-hand side, which is called The Witchery. It would be inappropriate to do a Harry Potter tour, not mention that. Inside, the different rooms are designed like total fantasy. Some of them are like a magic garden. Some of them, it's like being in a Gothic church. There's loads of candlelights and lanterns and real plants and flowers inside. It's busy, there's lots of people coming out. Just get a glimpse of the candlelight and the lanterns inside. And then next to it, the Scotch whiskey experience. I love it, not just because I love whiskey, but because in addition to being a museum and telling you the history and the process of the making of whiskey, there's actually a ride you can take inside where you get in a whiskey barrel and it sort of takes you through the history of whiskey making. Now, I haven't had my whiskey yet today, but don't worry, it's coming soon. So as we approach the castle, there's a little monument just to the right that I want to show you first. It's called the Witch's Well, and it's a small cast iron fountain that no longer flows, with a plaque honoring all the Scottish people who were burned at the stake for witchcraft between the 15th and 18th centuries. Throughout the years, more than 4,000 alleged witches were put to death in Scotland, and a great deal of them right here. In fact, during the 16th century, more women were murdered at this location than anywhere else in Scotland. So in 1894, a philanthropist named Sir Patrick Geddes commissioned his friend, artist John Duncan, to design this fountain and the plaque to commemorate the lives that were taken here. The plaque features a bronze relief of witches' heads. You see two surrounded by a snake, which is meant to highlight good and evil. So it represents the fact that every story has two sides. And it's also got a depiction of the foxglove plant, which can be used medicinally for good, but it's also a deadly poison in large enough doses. So again, depicting something that is both good and bad. There's Roman numerals on top of the plaque. They represent the years 1479 to 1722, which is the period when the persecution of witches was at its height in Scotland. I like to include this fountain and the plaque into the tour because it's a reminder for us. You know, today, for those of us who are into Harry Potter, we like the idea of witches and wizards and practicing magic. And for many people, you know, paganism, Wicca, these are all still religions that exist today. But hundreds of years ago, even pretending to be a witch, let alone practicing, was not only illegal, but deadly. Now, we climb this dormant volcano towards an imposing, sprawling structure of strength and mystic design that just surges out of this rock into the sky. I think it's kind of easy to imagine this building filled with hundreds of witches and wizards studying, playing, and living inside. In fact, J.K. Rowling commented that now, quote, "I've come to live in the shadow of what could be a lot like Hogwarts, except Hogwarts has a lake." So, aside from the missing lake, this castle essentially showcases most of the features and details of Hogwarts that Rowling describes in her books. With original structures dating from the 12th century, Edinburgh Castle is the most recognized landmark in town. It's dominated the skyline for centuries, and it sits upon this huge ledge of volcanic rock. Throughout history, many famous people have walked the walls, including Mary, Queen of Scots. Today, visitors can visit most areas of the castle and explore the rooms, view traditional Scottish clothing, weaponry, and even the Scottish crown jewels. If you decide to go in, you may also get a chance to see St. Margaret's Chapel, located in the castle compound. It's the oldest surviving structure in Edinburgh. Now, I'm not taking you in the castle today,
But if it is something that you might like to see, leave a comment below and let me know. And maybe that's something for the future. So, aside from J.K. Rowling saying that she lives in the shadow of what could essentially be Hogwarts, she's never come out to say that this castle had any bearing in her design of the school. But when she was asked to describe Hogwarts, she did say, quote, "A huge, rambling, quite scary looking castle with a jumble of towers and battlements. Like the Weasley's house, it isn't a building that Muggles could build because it's supported by magic." And I think Edinburgh Castle quite fits that bill. Now, while we're up here, we've got some really good views to check out. So we're gonna come over here, and you can see the hills and the city nestled right down here. And as we come along, they're right in the middle of your screen, the big building with the dome and the clock tower and the pointed building of the second clock tower behind it. That is that University of Edinburgh building and the George Harricot Museum that we looked at earlier. And the trees just to the left, that's Greyfriars Kirkyard. So you can see we've just walked all the way up. What a view. And there's another view from the other side here, which is a view of the area called the New Town. So J.K. Rowling mentioned that Edinburgh Castle doesn't have a lake, but it used to. There was something here called the Nor Lock, which was a man-made lock built right here to the side of the castle. And the idea was that it would provide an additional defense for potential invaders, which was a good thing because Edinburgh Castle is one of the most besieged properties in the country. However, throughout the centuries, the lock was used as a dumping ground. Medieval people living here would just throw all of their rubbish and all of their toilets directly into the water. It was used as a site for executions as well, so it was a pretty grim place. And it was finally decided to drain it, and it was turned into the beautiful park here, which we call Princes Street Gardens, that you can see just coming down from the castle. And the buildings on the other side that you can see through the trees are part of the Edinburgh New Town. So these were built after the lock was drained, and we refer to it as the New Town, even though most of the buildings are a little bit older than 200 years, because you see in Edinburgh 200 years is not really that long a time. So we're going to come right back down onto the Royal Mile. This is Gladstone's Land, which is a building that was owned by a man with the surname of Gledstone, and it's been preserved as a fine example of a sort of 17th century accommodation in Edinburgh. And gled in Gledstone actually is a Scots word for a kite or a hawk, and so in honor of the man who owned the house, there's a beautiful golden hawk right out front. So this doesn't have anything to do with Harry Potter really, although I guess it looks a bit like fox, doesn't it? Never thought of that before. Okay, here we go. Lady Stairs Close. And we come out to this courtyard. So this fabulous building is called Lady Stairs House, a faux medieval structure designed by architect Stuart Henbest Capper in the 1890s. It belonged to the Earl of Rosebery, and it was he who gave the building to the city for use as a museum in 1907. The interesting name is a connection to Lady Stairs Close, which we just walked down. A close is an old word for an alleyway, essentially. And that close was named after what was called Lady Stairs House, a townhouse built in 1622 that was bought in 1719 by Elizabeth Dundas, Dowager Countess of Stair, widow of the first Earl of Stair, hence Lady Stairs House. Today, the museum is run by the City of Edinburgh Council and is known as the Writers' Museum. Edinburgh became the first UNESCO City of Literature in 2004, and this museum shows why. Inside, you'll find dozens of portraits, works, and personal objects belonging to Scottish writers. It's primarily focused on Robert Louis Stevenson, Sir Walter Scott, and Robert Burns, but there are also occasional exhibitions, one of which was dedicated to J.K. Rowling and included a first edition copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone with annotations and drawings made by the author herself. I do want to mention, aside from Harry Potter, the museum is fascinating in its own right. I'll show you the fabulous sign. The eclectic collection includes the press used to print Sir Walter Scott's Waverley novels, Robert Burns' childhood rocking horse, and a plaster cast of his skull, just one of 3 that were made. These writers were inspired by Scotland and in many cases Edinburgh, just like Rowling herself. And here beside the museum is what is known as Maker's Court. Maker, M-A-K-A-R, is a Scottish word for author, but with a stress on the author's role as a skilled worker in the craft of writing. This courtyard is described as an evolving national literary monument because it features quotations from Scottish literature displayed on the paving slabs therein. I'm going to show you some. You'll find quotes in English, Latin, Scots, and Gaelic among the inscriptions. Originally, there were just 12 quotes installed here in 1997, but the collection has continued to grow. There's no quote here from J.K. Rowling, however, at least not yet. Here we have John Muir coming up, Gavin Douglas. There's so many, there's no way I can show them to you all. So we come along here. So I'm just highlighting a couple for you guys. As we come across, we keep going. So many more. Here we get Sir Walter Scott. Passing over. There's just so many. There's so many to see. They keep on going. And there's even some up here as well. Maybe one day, JK, huh? Okay. Now we're coming back out again to the Royal Mile. The bagpipes are still playing. See how close we can get. Okay, there is a man holding an owl here. That's a little bit unexpected. Why not? Who doesn't hold an owl? Absolutely gorgeous. And a small pub here on the corner. I feel like I have to mention it because it's one of my favorites, Deacon Brodie's Tavern. Now, on my Edinburgh tour, I tell you all about Deacon Brodie, but the summary is that by day he was a well-respected businessman and craftsman, but by night he was a criminal. And when the truth came out about his nefarious doings, it was quite the scandal. People couldn't believe that this upstanding member of society had actually been stealing from some of his wealthiest clients. And the sort of day and night personalities of Deacon Brodie inspired one of the most famous literary characters in history, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Here we found the bagpipes.
Stockton. This is in Stockton.
So here is St. Giles Cathedral, a historic cathedral dating about 500 years old, although it has been added to and expanded. It's considered the first church of Scotland, and some people also refer to it as the Westminster Abbey of Scotland. It's an absolutely stunning building, and again, if you want to know more about it, I've got plenty of information for you on the Edinburgh tour. So for the purposes of Harry Potter, I'm next going to take you to the Edinburgh City Chambers. It's the building up here with the flags on the left. Do you see that blue flag with the white cross on it? That is the flag of St. Andrew, who is the patron saint of Scotland.
Everybody wants.
Now, when you combine that flag with the flag of St. Patrick of Ireland and St. George of England, you end up with the Union flag, which is the one behind it. So the blue background and the white diagonal cross on the Union flag actually come from the flag of Scotland. And here we come inside. Now, this beautiful building holds the Edinburgh City Chambers. Originally built in 1753, designed by architects John Adam and John Fergus, this was previously home to the Royal Exchange. The trading merchants for whom it was built, however, never really warmed to it. They preferred to meet across the street near the Parliament building. So by 1893, the City Chambers had claimed the building, and today this listed building is still the meeting place of the City of Edinburgh Council. But for the purpose of our tour, there's one specific thing I want to show you, which is a flagstone right here in the corner. And you're going to see some golden handprints. These are the handprints of people who have won the Edinburgh Award, given to those who have made, quote, outstanding achievements and contribution to the city. Set up in 2007, the first winner was Ian Rankin, and the second in 2008 was J.K. Rowling. It's worth mentioning that her award ceremony took place on the 19th of September 2008, which made it Hermione Granger's 29th birthday, and if you were interested, my 24th. Now, whose hands do we have here? I'll show you. We have George Kerr in 2010, Sir Chris Hoy, 2009, and here's our girl, J.K. Rowling, 2008. And just to get them all in, Ian Rankin, 2007. Upon receiving the accolade here, Rowling stated, quote, "It is an absolute honor to receive this award, as Edinburgh is very much home for me and is the place where Harry evolved over 7 books and many, many hours of writing in its cafes." Now, This is much smaller than the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but these unassuming flagstones do call to Potter lovers who like to put their hands in the prints of one of their favorite authors. But finally, the front of the Balmoral Hotel. Now, it was at the Balmoral in room 552 that J.K. Rowling typed out the final words of the Deathly Hallows. Today, the room has been renamed the J.K. Rowling Suite, and the room contains a marble bust of Hermes, now in a glass display case, which is scribbled with the following, quote, J.K. Rowling finished writing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in this room on the 11th of January 2007. According to Rowling, she was having a hard time finishing her novel at home. So to get away from the distractions and to be able to fully concentrate, she checked herself into the Balmoral. Reportedly, very few people knew she was here, ensuring she got the peace and quiet that she needed. Rowling herself described the situation in 2010 when she did an interview with Oprah Winfrey here at the Balmoral. She started by saying, quote, "It turned out to be stimulating. As I was finishing Deathly Hallows, there came a day where the window cleaner came, the kids were at home, the dogs were barking, and I could not work. And this light bulb went on over my head. And I thought, I can throw money at this problem. I can now solve this problem. For years and years, I would go to a cafe and sit in a different kind of noise and work. I thought, I can go to a quiet place. So I came to this hotel because it's a beautiful hotel, but I didn't intend to stay here, but they were so nice to me here." And writers can be a little superstitious. The first day of writing went so well, so I kept coming back to the hotel, and I ended up finishing the last of the Harry Potter books in this hotel. Today, Harry Potter fans can reserve to stay in the J.K. Rowling suite, although it is worth mentioning this comes with a hefty price, over £1,000 a night. If you're on a budget, consider having a drink at the bar in the hotel to soak up your surroundings without spending a fortune.
I can't see your head.
So from J.K. Rowling's beginnings as an unemployed single mother writing in the cafes of Edinburgh to the luxurious penthouse suite where the books reach their conclusion, today we have traveled in the footsteps of the world's most famous wizard and his creator. And as the sun sets in Edinburgh, we'll get a last view of the castle up there on the hill. Again, my name is Margaret. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and share. Check out all free tours by foot, other videos all throughout the UK and internationally as well. And next time you're in town, come and see us. Good night.